Hi, and welcome to the fifth module in the School of Global Citizenry's Certificate of Entrepreneurship program. In these videos, we're going to be discussing managing financial resources. Now, you are likely watching these videos because you have an idea for a startup or you've already engaged in that process, and most of your drive and energy and passion are pointed at your idea. You have some notion of how you want to make a difference in your market, with your product, with your service. And one of the most tedious and sometimes boring aspects of managing a startup is going to be what we're going to talk about in these couple of videos, which is thinking about money, creating a budget, thinking about cash flow, developing projections. Now, it may be boring and it may be tedious, but it is going to be one of the most important and crucial aspects of what you do, and it will likely be the thing that makes or breaks your success in your market. Your idea can be fantastic, and if you don't think properly and wisely about the money, it will fall apart and go nowhere. My wife sometimes likes to say that this part of the conversation is kind of like the ropes on the hot air balloon. Without this part of the conversation, you will float off into the ether and go nowhere in particular. So you need some sort of a guidance system to figure out how to get where you're going and give it some kind of control. Most of the energy is going to come from your passion and your heart. But what's going to help you succeed practically is thinking intentionally about the money. So let me introduce myself in a little bit more detail at the beginning of this. Again, my name is Riley Kern. I am a husband to Laurel, who is my partner in our law firm and in a private equity company that we manage. And I am the father to 3 kiddos and 4 critters in our house, 3 dogs and a fantastic cat. The businesses that I have started that are relevant in this conversation are a law firm called Tallgrass Estate Planning that operates primarily out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, a private equity company called Alchemy Capital, and then my own passion project called Trek Mala, which makes meditation tools for outdoor enthusiasts. I'm a frequent and avid meditator myself and love to take some of these tools with me camping and hiking and canoeing, but oftentimes the mala beads that I use are not well suited for that kind of an environment. So I came up with an alternative and have made it available to others as well. So that's a little bit about my background. We're going to break this conversation into 2 parts. Part 1, the first video here, is going to be on understanding cash flow and creating a budget. And then the second part of the conversation is going to focus on developing financial projections. All 3 of those things together are going to really help give you some guidance in what's going to happen next with your business. So let's jump right into the question of understanding cash flow. What is it and why is it important? Cash flow in really basic terms is just your revenue minus your receipts. Ideally, you want to make more money than you spend. So you need to think in terms of how much money you are going to be making per good or service that you sell over a specific period of time. That could be a day, a week, a month, a quarter, a year, minus your expenses. And your expenses are your startup capital, one-time expenses, recurring expenses, taxes, those kinds of things. And hopefully by the end of that, what you have is a net where your revenue minus your expenses is positive rather than break even or negative. So some of the things you need to be thinking about in this conversation or this part of the conversation are, do you have sufficient revenue to cover your expenses? Now, maybe you intentionally do not. Maybe you have a startup nonprofit you're thinking about. Cash flow is still an important piece of the puzzle here, but your goal is not necessarily to maximize profits in that scenario. But hopefully, if you have a traditional startup or business here, you are looking to make a living off of this, and it's going to be crucial to make sure that you have more revenue than expenses. So how do you think about that? Number 1, are you charging the market value for your service or your good? It's important to look in your area or in your market, which may or may not be a geographical area, and think about what are others charging for a similar good or service. And then where do you want to fall in that range? Do you want to be outside of that range, be an outlier? Either you charge quite a bit more than most people or quite a bit less than others. Or are you looking to be kind of right in the middle so that you can say, listen, my fees are average. There are people that are charging more, people that are charging less. I'm right smack dab in the middle. Are you wanting to be kind of in the upper third or lower third for some reason where you're charging a premium because you want to argue that your good or your service is of a higher quality than others? Or create some exclusivity around it? Or are you trying to make it more accessible to more people by charging less? No matter what you do there, all of those are fine. Just be intentional about it. Know where you fit. Don't just pick a number out of a hat. Are you spending too much on expenses? If your cash flow is struggling to be positive, again, first look at what are you charging, but then also looking at what are you spending. And not all expenses are created equal. It's not always the goal to spend as little as possible on each individual expense. Some expenses, it's perfectly reasonable to find the lowest rate because there's not really a variation in quality, or the return on investment for you is not going to be any different if you spend a little or a lot on that particular thing. Other expenses, though, it may be worth your while and be a net positive for you to spend more on that expense. If you have somebody in particular who is incredibly skilled at developing your web traffic or your PR or your marketing, and they cost a premium, but the return on investment is significant, then that's a worthwhile expense. But just monitor those expenses and figure out which ones are worth spending the money on and where you can cut back, because again, there's no net positive to you on your return on investment. Then go ahead and cut back there. Do you have a sufficient working capital? So sustaining cash flow is important here too. There might be periods of time where either intentionally or unintentionally, you don't have customers or clients generating cash for you. Do you have sufficient cash in savings to get you through those periods of time? And then are you regularly monitoring your cash flow? Do you have some mechanism in place where you can see snapshots over periods of time, see trends in cash flow so that you can monitor different streams of revenue, different expenses, and get a sense on how those things fit together over time. So create a system, whether that's using software or having somebody that you contract with to monitor that for you and you get regular reports from, but have some way to monitor the cash flow over time so that you can make adjustments in real time. Creating a budget. Why is the budget so important? These are just a few reasons why you need to be thinking seriously about how your budget for your business is an important part of your strategy. It's going to help you make key changes. Is it the right time to give yourself a raise or to hire an employee or a contractor? Is it the right time to spread out to a new location? Is it the right time to pull back in some way and say, I'm going to cut off a particular source of marketing or revenue, or I'm going to let a particular employee go? But your budget is going to help you decide how to make those changes. It's going to help you decide how and when to use financing intentionally and strategically. There may be times where you need to go to a lender or lean on credit, find a small business loan, something. But you don't want to be doing that willy-nilly. You want to have a plan for how and when those kinds of funding strategies fit into the overall big picture. Do you need a bump in receipts to get to hire a new staff member or to expand to a new location or to develop a new website or to rebrand for some reason? That might be a good time to get some short-term financing. The budget's going to help you determine that. It's going to help you predict shortfalls. When do you see dips in revenue? And some of those might be predictable. Some of them might not. They may depend on other market conditions. They might depend on time of year. Depends on the kinds of good or service you're offering. But your budget should include predictions of shortfalls and how you plan to get through those. Again, through working capital, through lending sources. There's a variety of options. Just be intentional about it. There are going to be times where you exceed your projected earnings. You end up making more over a particular period than you were expecting. What do you plan on doing with that? When you have a big month, does that need to go toward estimated taxes? Does that need to go toward purchasing new equipment or inventory? Does that need to just sit in working capital and build up a source that you can draw from in an upcoming shortfall? But your budget is going to help you determine how to treat those retained earnings over and above your expenses and your projections. And then you need to be able to develop accurate financial statements to share with lenders and potential investors. If you do need to go and get a lending source, the lender is probably going to want to see an up-to-date profit and loss statement to see different returns on revenue streams and how your expenses have changed over time, if at all. But having a budget and monitoring that cash flow is going to help you generate those kind of statements. So how do you actually create the budget? Well, you need to first think about your own startup resources. What do you have to start your business? Do you have your own savings, and how much of that do you plan to use? Is getting a loan an option, or is it even advisable in your particular case? Do you have investors? Are there friends or family or others who would like to give you some money, either as a loan or as equity in your company? Do you have any inventory you can use to start, or do you have to purchase it all? Do you have any equipment you can use to start, or do you have to purchase it all? So startup resources is a crucial first thing to consider. Capital assets, again, purchasing inventory and equipment. One-time expenses. Do you need to buy land or construct a building? Are there legal fees? You need to hire an attorney to help, file your entity and create an operating agreement, especially if there's multiple partners or members in your organization. What about ongoing operating expenses like your rent, utilities, payroll, revenue projections, which we'll talk about in the next part. But what are your estimates of receipts over a given period? And then what's your break-even point? Once you've thought about all the costs, either the one-time costs or the ongoing costs that are part of your business, how much revenue are you going to need to generate and over what period of time to get to the point where now you can consider yourself somebody who's actually earning money from this business and not just making up lost ground on the startup cost? So in the next video, we're going to dive into the meat and potatoes of developing financial projections now that you've understood cash flow and have created a budget.